The early morning sunlight filtered gently through the thin curtains of a small, modest house on Elm Street, the streets of Willowbrook, a tiny town tucked away in the Midwest, were unusually quiet. Even the occasional crow seemed hesitant to break the silence. At first glance, everything looked perfectly normal: neatly trimmed lawns, the smell of fresh bread wafting from a nearby bakery, and the soft murmur of distant conversation carried by the wind. But there was something in the air that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up, an odd emptiness that clung to the town like mist. On Maple Avenue, a pale blue mailbox stood like a sentinel outside a small house. Its paint was peeling, yet it was functional, holding letters whose senders and recipients would never remember their contents. Inside the house, Margaret, a woman in her early 40s, moved around with methodical precision. She poured coffee into a chipped mug, the steam curling lazily as if it too were reluctant to rise. Margaret's movements were automatic, rehearsed, a series of gestures she had done hundreds of times. Yet none of them carried a memory she could recall. She did not know why she had a mug of coffee every morning, but it was a comfort, a ritual that she followed without question. Outside, the town square was already beginning to stir. Shop windows reflected the first rays of sunlight, glittering off signs advertising goods and services that no one seemed to remember needing. The bakery door swung open, releasing the scent of freshly baked bread into the crisp morning air. Behind the counter, Harold, a man in his late 50s with a neatly trimmed mustache, arranged pastries in the display case. He glanced around the shop, his eyes meeting the faces of customers who nodded politely, exchanging pleasantries they did not understand. Each smile, each handshake was a performance, a dance in which the steps were known but the music was forgotten. At the far end of the square, a small group of children played near the fountain. They laughed and chased each other in circles, their giggles echoing through the otherwise still town. Their laughter was innocent, yet it carried a strange weight. None of them remembered why they were friends, or why the fountain had always been there. It had always been part of their world, yet it was as if it had always been part of someone else's memory. A story handed down without context or meaning. Margaret stepped out of her house, her mug in hand. She noticed a man walking his dog along the cracked pavement. The dog, a scruffy golden retriever, bounded happily, tugging at the leash as if it alone remembered the joy of yesterday. The man's face was familiar, yet she could not place a name. They exchanged nods, a ritual of acknowledgement. Words were unnecessary. Recognition was mechanical, almost programmed. People moved through the town like pieces on a chessboard, aware of the game, but never knowing how they got there or why. Margaret's attention drifted to the clock tower at the center of the square. Its bells rang out the hour with precise regularity, yet no one truly noticed. Time passed, yet without memory. It felt less like a flow and more like a series of isolated moments. Each bell toll was a punctuation mark in a sentence no one remembered writing. As she walked toward the bakery, Margaret passed a bench where an elderly couple sat, holding hands. Their faces were serene, yet the serenity was hollow. They smiled at each other as if recalling a shared joke. Yet the punchline was lost in the fog of forgetfulness. Even their love was a performance, gestures repeated out of habit rather than understanding. Inside the bakery, The warmth enveloped Margaret. The smell of bread and butter was comforting, yet it stirred no memories. Harold greeted her with a nod and a polite good morning, which she returned automatically. She selected a loaf of bread, not knowing why she preferred this type over another, yet satisfied because the choice felt correct. Harold rang up the purchase, their hands brushing briefly, a connection as fleeting as the memory of it. Outside, a car drove slowly down Main Street, the engine humming softly. The driver, a young woman named Lily, waved absent-mindedly at a passerby. Unsure why the gesture felt necessary. She had driven this route countless times, yet the streets were unfamiliar each time. The town's layout was memorized, but the experiences attached to it were gone. She parked near the fountain, stepped out, and watched the water sparkle in the morning light. The fountain had always been there, yet it was a stranger to her eyes, as if it had appeared overnight in the center of her world. Children's laughter reached her ears again. She turned to see a little boy drop his toy truck, his face scrunching in frustration. Lily bent down, picked it up, and handed it back. The boy accepted it without a word, their interaction devoid of memory, but full of instinctive civility. This was the rhythm of Willowbrook, actions performed without the anchors of the past, a dance of awareness without comprehension. Margaret left the bakery with her bread and walked toward the library, a building she frequented daily, though she could never remember why. The library doors creaked as she pushed them open. Inside, rows of books stood like silent sentinels, filled with knowledge that no one in the town could retain. She wandered the aisles, fingertips brushing the spines, hoping for a spark of recognition. Each book was a universe she could enter, but never truly inhabit. A story she could read, but never recall afterward. At a reading table near the window, a man in his 30s was staring at a blank notebook, a pen poised, but hesitant, his brow furrowed as if trying to remember what had led him here. He opened the notebook and wrote a single sentence. "I feel like I am missing something important." He paused, reread the words, and then, inexplicably, tore the page out and crumpled it into a ball. The act gave him a sense of closure he could not name. Meanwhile, outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the elm trees lining the streets. The sound was familiar, comforting in a vague, undefined way. It reminded the townspeople of nothing in particular, yet it filled them with a quiet reassurance. They moved through their day guided by routines they could no longer name, patterns etched into their minds like shadows of a memory they would never reclaim. Margaret stepped out of the library, her bread tucked under her arm. She paused by the fountain, watching the water ripple in the sunlight. Children's laughter mingled with the faint sound of distant traffic, creating a symphony of ordinary life. And yet, underneath it all, there was a tension, an invisible thread connecting everyone, a sense that something had been lost, something vital that had shaped their existence. Across town, in a small diner, Harold served coffee to a man who ordered it every morning, but never remembered why he liked it. The conversation was polite, but devoid of history, filled with phrases learned by rote. Margaret entered, took a seat at the counter, and received her usual order, though she could not recall ever having it before. The familiarity was comforting, a placeholder for the lost connections of the past. Outside, the day progressed. A car alarm went off, startling a few passers-by who instinctively looked around before returning to their routines. Dogs barked, children played. The town's life continued without pause. But each moment was disconnected, a series of perfectly executed movements lacking the anchor of remembrance. Margaret walked home as the sun climbed higher in the sky. She passed neighbors watering their lawns, chatting at the fence, exchanging smiles that were genuine in expression, but hollow in understanding. The day carried on, ordinary in its chaos, yet extraordinary in its emptiness. Each person was a traveler in a land where maps existed, but the landmarks were forgotten. The roads traveled countless times, yet unknown. In her house, Margaret set the bread on the table and poured another cup of coffee. She sat quietly, staring out the window at the street below, contemplating nothing in particular. The memory of yesterday, last week, last year, everything was a blank canvas. Yet, there was comfort in the repetition, in the unbroken chain of routines that kept the town alive. As evening approached, the town's lights flickered on, soft yellow halos illuminating the sidewalks. The sound of distant footsteps echoed through the emptying streets. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythm of Willowbrook, feeling the pulse of a town that lived without memory, a town that existed in the now, untouched by the past, unaware of the future, suspended in an eternal, haunting present. The fountain glimmered under the setting sun, a silent witness to the lives of those who passed it daily, never knowing why it was there, yet always finding solace in its presence. Margaret turned away, heading back to her home, ready to repeat the rituals of tomorrow, unaware that today was already history, and that history was something the town could never remember. And somewhere in the quiet, a faint breeze whispered through the streets, as if trying to remind Willowbrook of its forgotten past. But the town, like its people, simply continued, moving forward in the rhythm of the mundane, a dance of lives lived without recollection, yet rich in the strange, haunting beauty of the present. The night in Willowbrook settled with an almost unnatural quietness. Streetlights cast pools of soft orange light over the empty sidewalks. The town seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful, as if every house held its breath. Inside one of those houses, Margaret sat by her window, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with a gentle sigh, brushing leaves along the pavement, creating a soft rustling sound that seemed to echo through the deserted streets. Margaret's thoughts drifted in a patternless way. She could not remember why she had started drinking tea instead of coffee in the evening. Yet, the act felt significant, as if it mattered in ways she could not grasp. Beyond the window, a figure walked slowly, their silhouette illuminated by the dim street light. It was Robert, a man she often saw but never remembered meeting. He paused for a moment, looking up at the sky, perhaps noticing the stars, perhaps not. His actions were deliberate, yet devoid of history, a reflection of the town itself. Inside the diner, Harold was cleaning tables, the metallic clink of utensils against plates punctuating the otherwise silent room. A radio played softly in the corner, a static-laden country tune that no one seemed to recognize. Harold hummed along, though he did not know the melody. It was a habit, a rhythm ingrained, comforting in its familiarity even without context. Customers trickled in sporadically, some to eat, some merely to occupy the space, but none seemed to remember why they came. They spoke politely, smiled mechanically, their eyes hinting at recognition, but holding no memory. On the far side of town, Lily walked past a small park. Noticing swings swaying slightly in the breeze, she felt a pang of curiosity, a strange pull toward the playground equipment. But she could not place why. The swings had always been there, yet each time she saw them, it was as if for the first time. Children's laughter, distant yet present, reminded her of nothing, yet evoked a subtle warmth she could not name. At the town library, the man with the blank notebook returned. He scribbled another page, each word fleeting and forgotten the moment it touched the paper. He paused frequently, staring at sentences that held no meaning beyond the act of writing itself. The librarian, a woman with silver-streaked hair, observed quietly, understanding instinctively that the patterns of Willowbrook's life did not rely on memory. She walked among the aisles, straightening books, adjusting shelves, yet none of the stories within could be retained by the town's inhabitants. Margaret left her house later that evening and walked to the small grocery store at the corner of Oak and 5th Street. The store's lights glowed warmly through the fogged glass, beckoning passers-by like a lighthouse. Inside, the shelves were orderly, stocked with goods no one remembered choosing. She picked up a carton of milk, studied it briefly, and placed it in her basket. Something about the label seemed comforting, familiar in a way she could not articulate. The cashier nodded at her, a smile exchanged without acknowledgement of why it was given or received. Back outside, a group of teenagers gathered near the fountain. Their laughter, loud and brash, cut through the night. They threw pebbles into the water, watching the ripples spread and vanish. Each movement seemed deliberate, yet the reason behind it remained elusive. One of the boys glanced at the clock tower, the hands frozen at a strange time for no apparent reason. The bell had not rung for hours, yet its presence reminded them of a rhythm they could not remember learning. Margaret paused at the fountain, her reflection fractured by the rippling water. She traced her fingers along the edge, feeling the cold stone, grounding herself in a sensation rather than a memory. In Willowbrook, moments like this were anchors in a sea of forgetfulness. People touched, tasted, smelled, heard, yet none of it lingered in the mind beyond the immediate sensation. Each day was a new canvas, painted with the same colors over and over, yet never retaining the strokes of the past. A car drove slowly down Main Street, its headlights illuminating the empty facades of shuttered stores. The driver, a middle-aged man named Thomas, glanced at the street and then back to the road, aware of passing through, but with no memory of having traveled here before. The town's layout was instinctively known, each turn familiar yet foreign at the same time. Thomas parked by the diner, stepped out, and walked inside without remembering the countless times he had done the same before. Inside the diner, the smell of fried food and coffee mixed in a comforting haze. Margaret took a seat at her usual booth, placing her bag and groceries on the seat beside her. Harold brought over her order, a slice of pie she could not recall ever having tried. Yet, she ate it with a quiet satisfaction, following a routine that felt inherently right. Conversations around her continued in muted tones, polite exchanges filled with recognition but void of understanding. The clatter of dishes, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional cough, all these sounds created a symphony of normalcy that kept Willowbrook afloat in its peculiar reality. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Clouds gathered in the distance, gray and heavy, casting shadows that stretched across the streets like a moving blanket. Margaret glanced toward her window at home, noticing the light still burning inside. She imagined herself returning there, performing the same rituals she did each night, unaware of the days passing, unaware of the week, the month, the years. Time existed as a sequence of actions rather than remembered experiences. In the park, the children had gone home, leaving the swing swaying gently in the night breeze. The fountain shimmered under the glow of the streetlights, the water sparkling with a quiet persistence. It was a silent observer of a town where memory had vanished, where each inhabitant existed in a state of perpetual now. Margaret walked home slowly, each step deliberate, yet instinctively guided by a path she could no longer remember learning. Her home welcomed her with the familiar creak of the floorboards, the scent of brewed tea lingering in the air. She placed her groceries on the counter and sat in the armchair by the window. Outside, the night deepened, and the stars began to pierce the sky with their cold light. She watched them quietly, feeling a connection to something beyond the town, something infinite and eternal, even if she could not name it. The house was silent except for the occasional ticking of a clock, a sound that seemed both trivial and profound. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythms of Willowbrook, the hum of life performed without memory, the patterns repeated endlessly, the beauty of existence divorced from recollection. Somewhere, far in the distance, a dog barked. Somewhere else, a car engine started. The town breathed in its own peculiar rhythm, each inhabitant a note in an eternal composition written without a composer, without history, and without future. And in that silence, Margaret felt an unnameable certainty, a quiet understanding that this was life in Willowbrook, a place of perpetual present, a place where the past was a stranger, and yet life continued, rich, strange, and hauntingly beautiful in its emptiness. The morning broke slowly over Willowbrook, casting a golden glow over the small town as if to wake it gently from a long, dreamless night. Birds sang tentatively, their notes uncertain, as though even nature hesitated to disturb the fragile balance of the town. Margaret stepped outside her house, the morning chill biting lightly at her cheeks. She carried no memories of the day before, yet her movements were deliberate, instinctively guided by routines she did not remember creating. On the corner of Elm and 2nd Street, a small bakery opened its doors, releasing the scent of fresh pastries into the crisp air. Harold stood behind the counter, arranging muffins in neat rows, his hands moving in practiced precision. A bell jingled as a customer entered, a woman with auburn hair, her eyes scanning the shop as if searching for something familiar she could not name. She smiled at Harold, and he returned the gesture, a recognition devoid of history, yet full of unspoken understanding. Margaret walked toward the town square, her shoes clicking softly on the pavement. The fountain glimmered in the morning light, water rippling gently as if in slow motion. Children played nearby, their laughter ringing through the streets. Yet their joy carried no context. They remembered no games, no past victories or defeats, only the pure, instinctive delight of movement, sound, and presence. Across the square, a man in a worn jacket fed pigeons. The birds fluttered around him, pecking at the crumbs he scattered, their movements predictable yet chaotic in their rhythm. He watched them quietly, a faint smile on his lips, unaware of why he had chosen this park, unaware of the countless mornings spent performing the same act. The pigeons, oblivious to human memory, were perfect companions in this timeless existence. Margaret's path led her to the library, its doors creaking open to welcome her into the familiar scent of old books and polished wood. She wandered between the aisles, fingers brushing over spines as though the touch alone might awaken a fragment of forgotten knowledge. A young man sat at a table with a pen poised over paper, hesitating, then scratching out words before tearing the page and tossing it aside. His frustration was quiet, a private echo of the town's collective struggle to act, to think, and yet never remember. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and freshly cut grass. Margaret paused at the fountain again, watching the water shimmer in the light. She traced patterns in the stone with her fingers, finding a kind of stability in the tactile sensation, a small anchor in a world where memories were perpetually lost. The fountain, like the town itself, existed in a state of persistent presence, enduring without recognition. In a nearby diner, Harold served breakfast to an elderly couple. They ate in silence, their movements synchronized yet empty of history. Every action, from pouring coffee to stirring sugar, was familiar yet unanchored. Margaret entered the diner, taking a booth by the window. Harold brought her tea, a slice of toast, and she ate mechanically, comforted by the consistency of routine rather than the recollection of taste or past experience. Across town, Lily walked along Main Street, her footsteps light on the pavement. She noticed a stray cat lounging on a fence, its green eyes following her as if it, too, were aware of the peculiar nature of Willowbrook. She stopped, crouching to scratch behind its ears. The cat purred, satisfied by her attention. Yet neither she nor the cat could claim memory of previous encounters. It was enough that the interaction existed in this moment. Margaret left the diner and wandered toward the park. The children were now playing tag, their movements instinctive, their laughter bright and clear. They collided and separated, chasing invisible memories that had long since disappeared. Parents watched from the benches, offering gentle guidance and occasional admonishments. Yet none could recall their own childhoods in the same space. Their advice was instinctive, a product of repetition rather than remembrance. At the edge of town, a small stream meandered through the woods, the water reflecting the morning sun. Thomas stood there, skipping stones across the surface, each one creating ripples that faded quickly into nothing. He paused, watching the circles expand and vanish, perhaps sensing the metaphor of his own life. The act was comforting, grounding him in a reality that existed without history. Margaret returned home in the late morning, her steps slow and deliberate. The bread from the bakery rested on the counter, its aroma mingling with the scent of morning coffee still lingering from Harold's visit. She set her tea down and watched the town through her window, observing the quiet harmony of a place where memory no longer dictated action. Each resident lived fully in the now, unaware of past joys or sorrows, yet performing life with instinctive precision. By noon, the town square was filled with movement. merchants arranging goods, townsfolk exchanging polite nods, children running in loops of endless play. Each action repeated, each interaction patterned, yet stripped of historical weight. Margaret walked through the square, her steps measured, observing the town's rhythm with a quiet fascination. She noticed details she would forget moments later: the color of a dress, the shape of a dog, the scent of freshly baked bread. But in this forgetting, there was a strange clarity. Life existed for its own sake, free from the chains of memory. As the sun climbed higher, shadows shifted across the streets. Margaret paused at the fountain, watching her reflection ripple and distort in the water. She wondered, vaguely and fleetingly, about the lives of those around her. What had led them here? What shaped them? The questions rose naturally, but dissolved as quickly as they appeared, leaving only the sensation of curiosity, the spark of wonder, without the burden of answers. In the library, the young man continued to write and tear pages. Unaware that Margaret had entered, she watched him for a moment, noting the precision of his movements, the quiet tension in his shoulders, the repetition of his gestures. He seemed to struggle against something intangible, a friction with a reality he could not fully comprehend. Margaret turned away, walking past the shelves, tracing the spine of a book she would never read, its knowledge forever closed to her. Outside, clouds moved swiftly across the sky, casting brief shadows over the streets. Margaret stopped at the park again, listening to the children, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a lawn-mower. Time passed, but without memory. It felt cyclical rather than linear. Each moment repeated endlessly, a dance of life performed without recollection. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Margaret returned home, the streets of Willowbrook bathed in the soft glow of early afternoon light. She stepped inside her house, placed her basket down, and sat by the window, watching the world move on outside. The town continued its quiet, methodical existence. People walking, talking, playing, working, all without memory, yet fully alive in the now. As evening approached, the sky deepened to shades of pink and orange. Margaret sipped her tea, watching the light fade across the rooftops. Somewhere, a dog barked, a car passed, a child laughed. The town breathed in unison, each inhabitant a note in a melody that existed independently of history, unbound by the past, and unafraid of the future. Willowbrook's beauty lay not in memory, but in presence. Each day was new, yet familiar, repetitive yet surprising, ordinary yet profound. Margaret leaned back in her chair, feeling the quiet pulse of the town, understanding instinctively that life continued here because memory was irrelevant, unnecessary. And in that acceptance, there was peace, strange and haunting, as the town moved forward in an eternal, unforgettable now. The afternoon in Willowbrook unfolded with a gentle, almost deliberate pace. The sun cast warm, golden light across the streets, illuminating the familiar facades of houses and the neatly paved sidewalks. Margaret walked slowly down Maple Avenue, her steps unhurried yet purposeful, guided by routines she could not name. Every movement in the town was familiar yet strange, as though the town existed in a perpetual moment, a world suspended between recognition and forgetfulness. Children ran across the town square, their laughter ringing out like bells. They chased each other round the fountain, tumbling and colliding, yet no one remembered the rules of their games, the stories of past victories or defeats. The joy was pure, instinctive, and fleeting, tied only to the present moment. Margaret paused by the fountain, her fingers tracing the cool edge of the stone. The water rippled under her touch, reflecting the sunlight in patterns she would soon forget. Yet each sensation felt real and grounding. Across the square, Lily walked past the playground with a small notebook clutched in her hands. She scribbled words and numbers, pausing often only to erase them moments later. Nearby, a man fed pigeons, tossing crumbs with practiced motions, the birds flapping and cooing in response. Their movements were chaotic yet patterned, a rhythm in the town's unremembered life. Margaret watched for a moment, feeling a quiet connection to these small, instinctive acts. In Willowbrook, memory was unnecessary, actions themselves held meaning. Margaret continued her walk toward the bakery, passing Thomas, who adjusted the strap of his backpack. His movements were precise, deliberate, yet devoid of history. He nodded as she passed, and she returned the gesture, an unspoken acknowledgement rooted in instinct. Inside the bakery, Harold arranged pastries in neat rows, their golden surfaces catching the light. The scent of fresh bread filled the room, comforting Margaret as she chose her usual loaf, a decision she could not explain, but that felt inherently right. Stepping outside again, bread in hand, Margaret paused briefly at the fountain. She watched the children's shadows stretch and twist across the square, chasing each other in loops that would never carry meaning beyond the moment. She could feel the rhythm of the town, hear the constant repetition of gestures, the unbroken cycles of action, the subtle harmony of lives lived fully in the present. Even as the past remained a mystery to all. Across the street, a man mowed his lawn with meticulous care. The hum of the mower blended with the distant laughter of children and the soft rustle of elm leaves. Each sound formed a layer in the town's quiet symphony, a music that existed without context or memory. Margaret walked home slowly, feeling the subtle pulse of Willowbrook with each step, the town alive, vibrant, and precise, yet untouched by recollection. By the time she returned, the sun had dipped lower, painting the rooftops with a warm, amber glow. Margaret placed her bread on the counter, took a deep breath, and paused by the window. From here, she could see the town in its entirety. The fountain shimmering, children still at play, neighbors moving through routines they no longer remembered, yet performing them with a strange, instinctive grace. Willowbrook thrived not because it remembered, but because it simply was. Life unfolded in the moment, complete and beautiful, a tapestry woven from the actions of people living fully, if forgetfully, in the now. The late afternoon in Willowbrook carried a soft stillness, as if the town itself paused to breathe. Margaret walked down Oak Street, her steps slow, each footfall deliberate. Shadows stretched long across the sidewalks, the golden light of the sun warming the town in a gentle embrace. People moved through their routines, watering lawns, straightening mailboxes, arranging flowers in window boxes, gestures repeated countless times without thought or memory, yet executed with perfect precision. In the town square, the fountain glimmered in the fading light. Children had shifted from running and shouting to quiet play, tossing pebbles into the rippling water. Each splash created concentric circles that vanished quickly, just as their laughter and joy would vanish from memory the moment it passed. Margaret paused by the edge, tracing the cool stone with her fingers, grounding herself in sensation rather than recollection. Lily passed by the fountain carrying a basket of freshly picked flowers. She paused, crouching to adjust the petals, her movements gentle and careful, instinctive yet without reasoning. Nearby, a man fed pigeons, scattering crumbs that the birds eagerly devoured. The rhythm of these small acts, repeated day after day, created a strange harmony that connected the town's residents even when no one could remember why. Margaret continued toward the library, its doors open to welcome her into the quiet scent of books and polished wood. Inside, the familiar hush enveloped her. She wandered the aisles, fingers brushing the spines of books that would never hold meaning for her. A young man at a table scribbled in a notebook, paused, then tore the page and crumpled it. His gestures, precise and repeated, mirrored the town's own cycle action without memory, persistence without understanding. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the elm trees, carrying faint scents of rain and earth. Margaret traced patterns in the shadows along the floor of the library, letting the sensation of movement anchor her in the moment. Willowbrook existed in perpetual present, a town alive in action, sound, and touch, yet untouched by history. Each resident lived fully in the now, bound together by repetition rather than recollection. Leaving the library, Margaret stopped at the diner. Harold was cleaning tables, the rhythmic clink of utensils punctuating the calm. A few patrons lingered, chatting politely, exchanging nods and smiles that were automatic yet comforting. Margaret took her usual booth by the window, sipping tea and watching the town move in quiet symphony outside. The streets glowed with the soft light of evening, each home filled with inhabitants performing life instinctively. As the town settled gently into the lull of approaching night, night had begun to settle over Willowbrook, the sky deepening to shades of indigo and violet. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting soft circles of warm light across the sidewalks. The town moved with a deliberate, gentle rhythm, each inhabitant performing their evening routines with precision, though none retained any memory of why these actions mattered. Margaret stepped out of her house, the cool evening air brushing her cheeks, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and freshly cut grass. The streets were quiet, yet full of subtle motion. A dog barked in the distance, chasing shadows. Thomas walked slowly past the fountain, hands in his pockets, pausing occasionally to watch the rippling water. He tossed a small pebble into the fountain, watching the circles expand and vanish. There was a calm in these small gestures, a meditative quality to acts repeated daily without recollection. In Willowbrook, the absence of memory had not emptied life, it had refined it, leaving only the essential motions that sustained the town's rhythm. Margaret wandered toward the park. The swings swayed gently in the breeze, moving on their own as if holding on to the laughter of children that had long since left. The fountain shimmered under the soft glow of street lamps, each droplet catching light like tiny stars. The echoes of children's laughter, now faint and distant, lingered in the cool air, carrying a strange sweetness. Margaret ran her fingers along the cold stone of the fountain's edge, grounding herself in tactile reality, feeling the present fully without any thought of past or future. In the diner, Harold wiped down counters with precise, methodical movements. The smell of fried food and coffee lingered, filling the space with comforting familiarity. A few townsfolk lingered over late meals, speaking in quiet, polite tones, their gestures pouring coffee, stirring sugar. Lifting utensils were perfect repetitions of countless evenings, yet devoid of history. Margaret entered briefly, nodded to Harold, and walked back out, carrying the warmth of routine and the unspoken connection of shared rhythm. The wind shifted, rustling the leaves of elm trees that lined the streets. Margaret paused by her window at home, observing the subtle, interconnected movements of the town. People walked slowly to their homes. Dogs padded alongside their owners. Lights glimmered from windows, and shadows moved across walls. Every detail existed in a timeless present, each action both familiar and new, perfect in its unremembered repetition. She realized, instinctively, that life in Willowbrook was composed not of memory, but of presence small, repeated gestures anchoring existence in the now. Margaret moved through her house with gentle, practiced precision. She set down her groceries, brewed a cup of tea, and settled into her armchair. The lamp's warm glow illuminated the pages of an unopened book, its knowledge closed yet silently waiting. Outside, the town sounds the distant hum of a car, the soft bark of a dog. The whispering leaves formed a quiet symphony. She closed her eyes, letting the sensations of life fill her completely. In this stillness, the town seemed to breathe as one. The fountain glimmered faintly through the window. The wind whispered across the streets, and the rhythm of Willowbrook's unremembered life continued. Margaret felt a subtle, unnameable understanding. The town did not need history to exist. Its beauty and vitality were contained entirely in the present. Every gesture, every act, every ripple in the fountain, and every footstep on the pavement wove together into a perfect, living tapestry. As the stars appeared overhead, Margaret sipped her tea slowly, feeling the comforting weight of being part of this perpetual now. She knew instinctively that tomorrow, as always, would unfold in the same way, a sequence of unremembered moments, each full and vivid in its own right. Life was neither hurried nor paused, it simply existed, complete in its impermanence, intricate in its repetition, and hauntingly beautiful in its unbroken flow. The night deepened, yet Willowbrook was alive in its quiet, consistent motion. Margaret rested in her chair, a calm settling over her, knowing that memory was not required for the town to thrive. Outside, the fountain shimmered under the lamp glow one final time before dark. The wind whispered through the trees, and the town moved steadily forward in an eternal present, full of life, perfectly alive, and entirely unaware of what had been lost. Night had fully descended over Willowbrook, wrapping the town in a quiet, velvety darkness. Streetlights glowed softly, casting halos of warm light that stretched across empty sidewalks. Margaret stepped outside her house one final time that day, carrying the soft sense of stillness with her. Breathing in the cool evening air, the scent of damp earth lingered after a passing breeze, mingling with the faint aroma of dinner cooking in nearby homes. Everything in Willowbrook moved with a measured rhythm, but without memory. Each motion felt timeless, infinite. She walked slowly toward the fountain at the town square. The water shimmered in the gentle light, ripples spreading across the surface in perfect circles. Children's laughter from earlier in the day had vanished, leaving only the echoes in the cool night air. Yet, even in their absence, the fountain seemed alive, a silent witness to the town's unremembered lives. Margaret traced the stone edge with her fingers, feeling its cool texture, grounding herself in the present. Across the square, a few townsfolk wandered, performing small, habitual acts, adjusting a jacket, brushing leaves from a doorstep, straightening a mailbox. Every gesture was precise, repeated countless times, yet emptied of history. They nodded politely to one another, exchanged smiles and murmurs of greeting, gestures that no one remembered initiating, but that felt natural and necessary. In Willowbrook, memory was irrelevant. Life flowed on through instinct, repetition, and subtle, shared rhythm. Margaret returned slowly to her home, passing Thomas, who paused by the street lamp to tie his shoes. Lily walked by with a basket of flowers, their colors muted in the moonlight. The town seemed suspended in a quiet, delicate balance, a choreography of small actions that bound its people together without the weight of recollection. Margaret felt a profound sense of calm in this, understanding intuitively that Willowbrook's beauty lay in its present, not in history. Inside her house, Margaret set down the groceries and brewed a cup of tea. She moved with deliberate care, carrying out each action as she always did. Though she did not remember why, she settled into her armchair by the window, watching the streets glow under the lamplight, the fountain shimmering softly in the distance, the subtle hum of life wind rustling through elm leaves. Distant footsteps, the bark of a dog filled the night. A quiet symphony of existence performed fully in the now. She sipped her tea slowly, letting the warmth fill her. The lamp's glow illuminated the pages of an untouched book beside her, a silent repository of knowledge that would remain unremembered, yet somehow present. Outside, the town moved gently, inhabitants performing the rituals of life without awareness of the past, yet with perfect harmony. Every act, pouring tea, closing a door, sweeping the sidewalk, adjusting a window pane, was precise, instinctive, beautiful in its repetition. Margaret leaned back, watching the fountain ripple one final time. The water caught the lamplight, creating a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow. Somewhere, far in the distance, a car engine hummed, a dog barked, a window opened and closed. Each sound, each motion was ordinary, yet part of a larger, unbroken pattern that sustained Willowbrook in its perpetual present. Life here did not rely on memory, it thrived in the rhythm of repeated gestures, in the beauty of existence lived fully in the moment. The night deepened, stars appearing in the clear sky above. Margaret felt a quiet understanding, an unnameable truth. The town did not need history to exist. Its life was perfect in the present, each motion, each breath, each ripple in the fountain woven together in a tapestry that needed no past. Willowbrook was alive, not because it remembered, but because it simply was. As she set her empty cup aside and closed her eyes, Margaret felt the town's pulse beneath her fingertips, in the hum of the streets, in the glimmer of the fountain, in the whispering leaves. The residents slept, moved, breathed, and acted in synchrony. A dance of life unanchored from memory, yet complete in its execution. Everything in Willowbrook existed in the eternal present, hauntingly beautiful, serene, and alive. And in that stillness, Margaret understood, without words or reasoning, that forgetting had given the town something far greater than memory. Willowbrook existed fully, vibrantly, in each unfolding moment. Life was enough. The town, the fountain, the people, The night itself they simply were, perfectly, endlessly, and Margaret, in the quiet of her armchair, felt the unbroken continuity of it all. The night embraced Willowbrook completely, and the town, alive in its own timeless rhythm, continued, full and vibrant, moving gently into the next day, unburdened by what had been lost, yet endlessly, exquisitely alive.